I think Red Dwarf is one of the greatest comedy sci-fi series of all time. Welcome to SciTrek, your sci-fi TV and movie channel. Before we get into this video, I just want to point out the fact that although normally when I create these videos I would go back and watch a full season or at least 2 seasons of a TV show before making a review on it, I didn't do that with this particular video because I was on holiday. So everything I say in this video is going to be very raw, very honest and very anecdotal. However, that being said, I hope you enjoy what I have to say. So as I said at the beginning of the video, I think Red Dwarf is one of the greatest sci-fi comedy series of all time. And there's a few reasons why I think that. But first of all, if you haven't heard of Red Dwarf, you've never seen it, let me give you a brief explanation of what Red Dwarf is about. As mentioned, it is a comedy series primarily, but it is also science fiction. It doesn't take itself too seriously, and that's one of the best things about it. But the basic premise is this. There was essentially a radiation leak on the mining ship Red Dwarf, which killed the entire crew except for one person named Dave Lister, played by Craig Charles, who was in a stasis chamber because he'd committed a crime, the crime being that he'd had a cat on board. So whilst he was in this cryogenic sleep stasis thing, the entire crew of Red Dwarf completely died. Millions and millions of years passed and he eventually woke up when all the radiation had dissipated, woken up by the ship's computer, Holly. Upon his awakening, he finds that Holly has resurrected one of his former crewmates, Rimmer. Rimmer is now alive but in a holographic state, which means as a hologram he can't do things that normal people can. He can't touch things, taste things, do anything that a normal person can because he's literally just made of light. Now in the first season there is a third member of the crew called the Cat, and that ties back to Dave Lister's original crime. As I mentioned, Dave Lister was put into stasis because he had a cat on board. Now, when the crew of Red Dwarf all died, essentially the cat survived somehow, had babies, who eventually evolved into a human-like creature with cat features. The cat is played by Danny John Jules, and he's absolutely one of my favourite characters on the show. He's one of these wacky characters who's really into fashion. He's very self-obsessed. He always wants to look good. Essentially how a cat is, they're very self-obsessed. Everything's all about them, and he just plays the part perfectly. It just makes a really funny character. Now, in later seasons, there was a fourth character added called Crichton, which was a mechanoid robot, and he was actually one of my favourite characters as well. But I want to talk to you briefly about Dave Lister. Dave Lister is the heart and soul of Red Dwarf. Dave Lister is one of these people who is not going to get anywhere in life. He's a layabout, he's lazy, he's sloppy, he's messy. He's just an all-round terrible person. Not to say that he's a bad person, like he's really nice, he's got a kind heart, he's just not very good at being a human. And one of his most favourite things to do in the whole wide world is really wind up Rimmer. Rimmer is one of these characters who's very prim, very proper, follows the rules and wants to progress with his life, but he's just so stupid and so in his own head that nothing ever goes right for him. So he is essentially the comedic value in Red Dwarf. Everything that goes wrong usually happens to Rimmer. But that's enough about the characters. Let's talk about the overall themes of the show and why I think it's one of the greatest sci-fi comedies. So being a sci-fi comedy, it's obviously going to take inspiration from other science fiction television shows and movies that have come before it. It's had references to Alien, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Star Wars, and many, many other shows. But the thing it does really well is it doesn't take itself seriously. The sets are really wobbly, the CGI and the prosthetics are really, really bad, and the humour is absolutely ridiculous. It's borderline slapstick, and that's what makes it genius. Red Dwarf was very, very different to everything else that had come before it. It was a science fiction show, which many science fiction fans absolutely loved, but it was also comedy, which meant you could have a laugh, you could sit down, you could watch it, and it was fun for the whole family. I am a massive science fiction fan. I love everything to do with space, space battles, aliens, time travel, all of that kind of stuff, and I love Red Dwarf. However, there are people in my family who don't like any of that, but still enjoy Red Dwarf because of the comedy and because it doesn't take itself too seriously. You watch it and you think, This is terrible, but I love it. Now, Red Dwarf first started in 1988 and is actually still going now, and that is somewhat of a problem. Now, I love Red Dwarf, as I've said before, but it's one of those shows that has really outstayed its welcome. There was a period of time where Red Dwarf had basically ended, and you could go back and we could watch all of the seasons from season 1 all the way up to the last episode and enjoy it for what it was. But then they'd done a reboot, and although it was good and it was still Red Dwarf, it had slightly higher production value, and it kind of looked a little bit different, and the charm of everything being a little bit, you know, slapped together, terrible CGI and terrible prosthetics, it was there, but it wasn't there to the extent that it was before. And I think a good reason for that is because there was 10 years in between where Red Dwarf had come off the air and went back on the air. It stopped airing in 1999 and was then revived back in 2009 with a series called Back to Earth. And yes, I absolutely loved it. I will always love it because it is Red Dwarf, and Red Dwarf is one of my favourite television sci-fi comedy series of all time, as I've said multiple times throughout this video. But for me, the golden era of Red Dwarf was that initial first run of 10 or so seasons. Between 1988 and 1999, those were the golden years of Red Dwarf. You had themes such as time travel, they explored free will, they explored the idea of you can have anything you want inside this video simulation, what do you want, and the idea that your mind will just revolt against you and tell you don't want that, you want this is what you really want, and give you something that you absolutely hate. One of my favourite episodes, actually, that was, they went into a video game, and of course they did all of the things that you would normally do if you can go and get whatever you want. They had lots of hot women, they had lots of alcohol, they basically did whatever they want, fast cars, etc. And then, well, it happened to Rimmer. As I said, he is the comedic value on this. He had everything he wanted, and then his mind went against him, and he eventually ended up becoming married to someone he didn't like, having kids, and his life became a misery. Now, I don't know what that says about Rimmer, but it was funny to watch. Then he also had time travel episodes where they essentially have echoes from the past and you could see into the future. So they explore things like the grandfather paradox, determinism, and destiny, things like that. And it was overall a fantastic show. If you haven't already watched it, I urge you to watch it. I believe it's on BBC iPlayer. If you're outside of the UK, you'll probably get it on a streaming service called BritBox, which I don't know if it's available elsewhere, but you can probably find it somewhere. But yeah, I want to know what you think. Have you seen Red Dwarf? Did you like it? And what are your overall thoughts on it? Let me know in the comment section down below, and if you are new to the YouTube channel, make sure you hit subscribe and press the bell notification so you don't miss a single video. And whilst you're down there, consider becoming a fully fledged SciTrekker. Hit the join button down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week.